Now, from the Signature, a division of Esquire Bank Studios.
This hour of the Shaun Thompson Show is sponsored exclusively by DonleyAuctions.com. They need your guns. Sell for top dollar. DonleyAuctions.com.
From the streets of Melrose Park to the trading floor of the Merc, he's fought for every dollar he's ever earned. And now, with personal liberty and our system of capitalism under assault in America, he's here to seize back our rights from the government. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the other, he's Shaun Thompson. And this is the Shaun Thompson Show.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag.
Here's how it will work. Once a month, our 5 city-run grocery stores will set prices for this core set of goods at 30% below typical retail prices. No exceptions, no gimmicks. The savings will last for the entire month. That means no weekly fluctuations nor sticker shock at the checkout line.
So who makes up the difference?
Yeah. You want me to hold your banana, or you got it?
You know what? That'll be great.
All right. I've never held someone's banana so they could sign my petition before.
It's one thing to hold a banana. It's another thing to buy it for somebody who hates you. My next guest knows there is no such thing as socialism. There's just theft in the name of some virtuous recipient of your welfare. I don't think it works too well. Dr. E.J. Antoni of the Heritage, you handsome devil. What exactly is the schematic or the financial principle of socialism? Can you tell me?
Shaun, I would say it's theft. It's probably the simplest way to put it, right?
By cowards. By cowards who don't have the ambition, to steal from you directly. Mm-hmm. They want the government to do it.
Right. And it's so insane, Shaun, to hear these people talk about how they're going to run these grocery stores with 30% discounts. You're talking about an industry with a roughly 2% profit margin, so the taxpayer gets hosed and takes a 28% loss on this stuff. And that's assuming that the grocery store is actually well run, like an Aldi's, like a Gristedes, like a Walmart in New York City, which obviously it's New York City, so it won't be well run.
But it's the same sad story of the promises of services, the promises of goods, and the name that there is somehow a way in which this corporation that produces nothing, that delivers nothing, called a municipality, can deliver it rather than what they really are, policies of plunder. And, there was a time, EJ, when we were young, and I didn't have thinning in the back, which I tell everyone is a colic, where there was talk of privatizing all of them, from the street department to the landscapers to every service, because it would then have the reality of a private economy, when now all you have growing in mismanaged, corrupt areas is government. And it isn't a socialist movement. It's not a communist movement. It's a Soviet movement. They're promising a Soviet Union. And sooner or later, we're going to have to discuss it for what it is. And it's kind of refreshing to hear them admit they're going to have to destroy the republic to do it, aren't they?
Oh, 100%. And, look, this is not their first bite at the apple either. Chicago tried these government-run grocery stores as well, right? Same thing with places like Kansas City, and then obviously there are tons of examples outside the United States as well. But if you go back to New York City, Shaun, we forget that they already did this with public transit, right? Where you had a transit system that was privately run, the government takes it over, and it goes from making a profit to a loss. And they've had to cut back services. They've had to cut back not just the quantity, but the quality of service as well. And you're going to see exactly the same thing here. It starts with the confiscation of private property and the destruction of property rights, and thereby it eliminates the whole incentive to earn a profit, which is ultimately to serve your fellow man. And that is why service always gets worse in these government takeovers, not better. You can put aside all the marketing, all the smiles of the charismatic Mamdani. At the end of the day, it's about policy, not personality. And as long as the policies are this terrible, it doesn't matter how great these guys' personalities are. The results are going to be exactly the same. They will be terrible. What you're going to end up with here, Shaun, sure, you're going to have a couple of months of cheap bananas. Sure, of course you will. But in the long run, it's going to be closures of grocery stores. This is going to drive out marginal stores. It's going to cause planned stores to just cancel their development, that is. And so New Yorkers are going to end up having to take 2 trains and a bus to actually get out of real food deserts, not just imagined ones, and get to a real grocery store.
Well, the same thing happens, EJ, with the illusion of services paid for by government in the name of food stamps. The greatest example, once again, is the Democrat areas, but more specifically, Illinois, Chicago. Chicago gets $1.5 billion a year in just food stamps. Yet grocery stores go out of business. And the reason is you give to people of low character who you say are unfit and unable to make their own money. But they are not actually buying food with the bulk of those food stamps. They're selling them for pennies on the dollar. So the system that is implemented now is a failure and a fraud and an illusion that destroys the restaurant, the grocery store business, and this other name of services of entrusting people who are financial illiterates or they're just good for nothing with the idea that they aren't. And we keep rewarding and we keep throwing money. Ultimately, we're going to have to make the true argument that if you cannot manage your own finances, you're really not an asset to anybody. In fact, you are the definition of a liability, which is the beauty of what we're living through. Even though it's tragic and expensive in the cost of it, it's very obvious that in these specific areas, the people cannot be considered an asset to their town, their county, their state, but moreover, their country. Can they? Why is it the same system that just gets more expensive unless the real problem is we have an entire tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who are really good for nothing?
Well, I think what they're good for is to vote, right? This is I think the fundamental difference here. For the politician, they don't look at people as an economic unit. They look at them as a voter. And so it doesn't matter to the politician if this person is economically productive. Are they productive in the sense of them being a voter? In other words, if they'll vote for me, then that's good. If they're not going to vote for me, then this person is useless. It doesn't matter if the individual is the next great inventor or entrepreneur or innovator. It doesn't matter if this person develops some life-saving medical cure or the next great invention, the replacement for the iPhone or a viable electric car, whatever the case may be, right? None of that matters. What matters to the politician, again, it's not economic vitality. It's just simply the voter as a voter, right? The person's vote is all that matters to them. And so as long as that system remains, as we have kind of drifted away from a republic to a democracy, I think that's going to exacerbate the problem, right? Back when you had, you didn't have direct election of senators, for example, I think that was a very good thing. You had all these different parts of government that all had different constituencies, right? Representatives had a different constituency from senators, had a different constituency from state legislatures, from governors, from presidents, even from Supreme Court justices. That was all a very good thing.
Well, and here's the other issue. I believe the lack of resistance from Americans who should be, in fact, suing these very entities, these corporations. We call them governments, but they're really corporations, especially on the municipal level. And they should be suing them for eroding the covenant between the federal government and the American citizen, which is the bundle of rights of property. As I talk to you right now in Illinois, a town that is really the picture of self-hatred called Evanston, Illinois. This is the town that tried to pretend that they were somehow perpetrators of the slavery and they were offering reparations. Right now, they're trying to tax property owners for vacancies. So they've eroded every principle, every right in the bundle of rights of the American real estate owner, which is completely different than the rest of the world. Here, we are a country built on the property rights of the citizen, not the extortion rights of the corporation called their municipality. So ultimately, there has to be an organization, such as the Heritage, such as Landmark Legal, such as Pick Somebody, to organize and sue these corporations for what they are. They're not, immune sovereignty might be players in the corporation, but the corporation itself is bound to law. Why are so few Americans understanding that they have corporations instead of governments? They're local arms of government, but they still are corporations. And they themselves are bound by law and have to abide by the law that protects your rights. I'm amazed at how many of the owners of real estate are taking it in New York, are taking it in Evanston or Chicago or California. Ultimately, do they not have rights? Have these municipalities, these incorporations, have these vestibules of corruption found a way to circumvent the American covenant with the citizen?
Well, I mean, Shaun, to a certain extent, I hate to say this, I really do. But to a certain extent, I think they kind of have found a way around all of that. Because if you look at what Antoni just did in New York, where he doxed all of these very wealthy individuals, right, in terms of their real estate holdings with trying to tax second properties, I mean, that was genuinely horrible. And yes, I understand that all of that information is technically publicly available. I get it, but it's a lot of work for people to go through the massive residential rolls in New York and actually find things like people's second homes. Okay, that is not something that's very easy to do. It would be incredibly time consuming. And it also would be unclear, I think, to a lot of folks what the actual worth of so many of these property is, and therefore those folks' tax liability. But the fact that they did all of that, why was it done? It was done to inspire fear. Right? It was done for the same reason anybody gets doxxed. It's to try to put a target on the person's back so that somebody who gets hyped up from all the violent rhetoric on the left ends up acting on that and doing something terrible, a la what happened to Charlie Kirk.
Well, you know what's fascinating, too, is these people of means that would put the property in their name. And, you know, this is a regulation that was passed years and years ago. You didn't have to put it in your name. You could put it, you still don't if you organize a trust or an LLC, but you lose the tax advantage of homestead if that's the case. But people who have second homes and whatnot, they put it in LLCs or they put it in trusts, like the Pritzkers. Ironclad Trust pays no taxes. But you see all of these people who supposedly are these intellects in New York City who had the property in their name with their proper address. And there was a time when you had the right of privacy in this country. We've allowed this to be eroded as well. It was only a handful of, 30 years ago, where these municipalities and organizations that are supposed to represent you mandated you disclose every dollar, every aspect. And I can't help but notice in all of the so-called economic issues in real estate, like the big crash where 9% of the people were delinquent on their mortgages, they used that as an opportunity to strip the anonymity away from the American citizen as they fight for the anonymity of the illegal, who gets so much of these benefits without ever really disclosing who he is or who he was or with any very proof. So at a certain point, it's our fault for 30 years ago, not fighting for our right to privacy, which allegedly we're guaranteed. And yet, where do we have it if we want to be a functioning citizen who earns money honestly and plays by the rules as they're set, as they keep setting rules to take away the very property rights we're guaranteed?
Shaun, I think you bring up a great point. Every time we see one of these assaults on liberty, which is what they are, every time we see a small erosion of our rights, be that right to privacy, be that property rights, it only emboldens the bureaucrats to just take it one step further. And that's sadly, I think, what has been happening. If you look at, essentially, ever since something like the Fed was created, right? What has happened to the purchasing power of the dollar? The creature from Jekyll Island just slowly erodes it a little more and a little more 1 year after the next. If you're talking about the kinds of infringements on privacy and property rights that you were just articulating, again, I think it's the same mechanism. It's death by 1,000 cuts.
Well, one of the fascinating things to watch is the stupidity, and I don't just mean the weekend numbers of how many Democrats shoot other Democrats in these big cities like Chicago, but the stupidity of the people who would consider themselves Democrats, as the oligarchs like J.B. Pritzker in Illinois is a perfect example, pretends to give a tax holiday simultaneously with increasing sales taxes on different counties just to fund the Chicago public school systems. So the way in which they manipulate the ignorance of the citizens And they have this, and Republicans are guilty of this. Republicans that are supposedly on our side making the argument. They argue with the premise of everybody lives in areas that tax things 2 and 3 times, like in Illinois or in New York or California or New Jersey. When the reality is the difference in states is what the side that isn't socialist doesn't want the Democrat mafia to succeed. Why is it that the Republicans in general, and you go on these news shows, I just paid for the middle grade, not the premium. I just paid today $3.71. I talked to a buddy of mine in Chicago for the lowest octane gas in Illinois. He's paying $4.35 or some ridiculous amount of money. The majority, the difference only is in taxes. In most cases, taxes on taxes. And yet we allow these Democrats who have destroyed these areas. California is the greatest example in the shortest period of time. New York and Chicago have been on their way for 100 years. They like it corrupt. But when you see California paying the highest taxes on the very essential energy of all kinds, the idea that they still are in the running just tells me that people are truly illiterate to what they're living through, even though they pretend to be in a democracy.
Well, I think it tells you everything, Shaun, that people living in California, somebody like Gavin Newsom, talk about how high gas prices are Trump's fault. In other words, that Californians are paying the most in terms of per gallon of anyone in the entire country. They will listen to Gavin Newsom and actually believe him. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom is the reason why taxes are so high in that state, especially taxes on gas and diesel. And so that really, I think, speaks to a lack of critical thinking skills on the part of people who are willing to swallow that nonsense and actually go along with it. Because, Shaun, you're absolutely right. Places like Illinois, like California, and also throw New York in there as well, who have these very, very high gasoline taxes, of course, they're going to be paying much more for fuel. It's a pretty easy correlation, right? That's not hard to do that math. Now, do you have certain instances, places like Alaska and Hawaii, where there are other extraneous factors like the Jones Act, which artificially increases transportation costs and therefore is going to increase the cost of getting fuel to those places? Yes, absolutely. The differential from one state to another is not based solely on taxes. I don't hear anyone making that argument. But again, it is very clearly the case that the taxes are what accounts for the bulk of the difference from one state to another. When you can go anywhere up and down the Illinois-Indiana state line, and you can find gas stations on each side that end up having roughly the same differential anywhere along that state line, that tells you everything you need to know.
I'm so amazed at these areas that bankrupt themselves, because what we really discuss, you and I, on a weekly basis, and it's very evident that this is the issue, are self-induced financial collapses. These problems we discuss, these are very specific and they're very orchestrated because they are regulated into bankruptcy. They are regulating the financial distress on their citizens. And when I say they, I'm very specific. These are Democrat areas specifically that have these policies of plunder. And when you look at the schemes in which they're able to do, here's my argument. When I hear these imbeciles, these fat people on the Democrat Soviets of America, Socialist, whatever the hell they are, or AOC and the rest of them, and they keep promising this socialism. Why is it that we say, we don't say, I should say, when you talk about a Democrat area, it's already socialist. It has been for 40 years. And the problems are on the problems. And I think too few people, because they compartmentalize the mafia. Talking. Did you hear me?
We keep talking. I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So we keep talking, Shaun, about capitalism and the failures of capitalism, right? But the fact of the matter is that what we have in so many instances isn't even capitalism. In other words, when people today complain about the cost of living and how capitalism has failed and all these different unequal outcomes, invariably in each of those instances, the very things that those folks are complaining about, especially young people, they're not failures of capitalism at all. In fact, they were interventions by government that disrupted the natural mechanisms of capitalism, prevented finding any kind of equilibrium. They prevent market entrance, for example, from increasing competition and reducing prices. These are all things that are the result not of too much capitalism or unfettered capitalism. It's not a lack of regulation. It's not that taxes are too low or the rich aren't paying their fair share. Nonsense. In each of these instances, and I can give you a couple really good examples, it is the result of government involvement in the market, not a lack of government. Where is it, for example, that things are most outrageously expensive, they're most unaffordable? Things like housing. What's more regulated than the housing market? Things like education. Where has there been more government involvement and more government attempts to, quote unquote, help than in education? And then what about medical care? Another incredibly expensive part of our economy where the growth of prices has greatly outstripped the growth of incomes. Again, these are all areas where you have the most government involvement in the economy. So once more, it is not that capitalism has failed us. It is that government intervention is disrupting the natural outcomes that we would have in capitalism, which is actually more quantity and more quality, better quality, and lower prices for consumers.
So I want you to tell the eggheads at Heritage, this is the greatest example of fear-mongering because there already is communism in America. And I'm going to once again take the benefit of being from the communist capital in America, the mafia capitals in America, communist capital. And that is the idea that they have just passed on 5 counties a 0.25% tax increase just for Chicago public schools. But the most important part of this is it was only been since 2017 that Rahm Emanuel, in conjunction with a convicted gangster by the name of Mike Madigan and Ed Burke, orchestrated it so that the entire state of Chicago is liable for just the Chicago public school system. Since that time, the cost per pupil has gone up more than 100% since 2017, okay? And now you're passing taxes on taxes of people who have never, in some cases, been to Chicago, let alone ever will go to Chicago. And the idea that there isn't a national pushback on this, as we are distracted with the fact that these new fat people and ugly people calling themselves the Democrat, the Soviets of America, Socialists of America, are promising communism. When you have it, and we have it, and in 9 years, in just the Chicago public school system, costs have gone up over 100%, but moreover, taxes on taxes have gone up 300%. And they break it down just 0.25 on top of a 0.175, on top of a 0.5. You know what I mean? They've already done this. Heritage needs to expose this to the country because the system as it exists is what Yuri Bezmenov warned us of. When you compartmentalize the destruction, the reality and the abuse and the atrocity of the failure isn't shared by the nation. If the country knew what just happened in Illinois to finance the most incompetent, corrupt school system in the country called Chicago Public Schools, I think we could stop it. Will you expose it, E.J. Antoni, Doctor of Economics?
Shaun, I will do my best. You have my word.
All right. There's a cigar in it at Shaun Fest when I see you. Thank you, brother, for always making time.
Oh,
yeah, come on,
my
you know, and I bring the heat. I bring the good cigars. I'm not going to give you some $2 liquor store cigar. It's going to be a good one.
Looking forward to it, my man.
We'll be back with your calls and comments.
This is the Shaun Thompson Show on AM 560. The Answer.